Good morning, you are watching Anewz. I'm Bakhtiar Sanov, and let's see the top stories shaping our world. Iran pledges to hold attacks if Israel does, following the US President's announcement of a ceasefire agreement. Iran's parliament approves closing the Strait of Hormuz. Analysts say oil prices may soar. The European Union and Canada have agreed on a new security and defense partnership. "12 days of escalating attacks between Iran and Israel may be drawing to a close after the US announced a ceasefire deal. But continued strikes, mixed signals, and silence from both governments leave the status of that agreement uncertain.
US President Donald Trump announced on Monday that a ceasefire between Israel and Iran would take effect following nearly 2 weeks of escalations. Posting on Truth Social, Trump said that a complete and total ceasefire would be implemented between the two countries. He wrote, "On the assumption that everything works as it should, which it will, I would like to congratulate both countries, Israel and Iran, on having the stamina, courage, and intelligence to end what should be called the 12-day war." The announcement came shortly after Iran carried out missile strikes targeting a US base in Qatar. Neither country has confirmed the ceasefire. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said early on Tuesday that there was no agreement on any ceasefire between Israel and Iran. However, later, he added in a post on X that if Israel stops its illegal aggression against the Iranian people no later than 4 a.m. Tehran time on Tuesday, the Islamic Republic has no intention of continuing its response afterward. Israel has not issued any official statement confirming or denying the ceasefire. Following Trump's ceasefire announcement, US Vice President J.D. Vance said that Iran was no longer able to build a nuclear weapon after US strikes destroyed its infrastructure. He says the crucial question now is whether Iran's ability to enrich uranium has been fully destroyed. He says that a clear message has been sent to Iran, and that is that US jets can reach their homeland any time.
We have to talk to Iran and, of course, to Israel about what the future holds, because while we have obliterated the Iranian nuclear program, our hope and our expectation is that they're not going to try to rebuild that program. And I think that's what the president is really trying to figure out here, is to build a long-term settlement here to where we can have peace in the region, where our regional allies and, of course, the American people, most importantly, can be secured, but where we can ensure that the destruction of the Iranian nuclear program that has already happened is not something they try to rebuild.
Missile exchanges were continued between Israel and Iran even after Trump's ceasefire announcement. Iranian state television reported that Israel conducted heavy airstrikes on Tehran late Monday night. Tehran's air defense systems were activated in response to incoming targets, marking what it described as the most intense air defense clashes since the 13th of June. Later that night, Israel also reported that a fresh round of missiles was fired from Iran. Sirens were activated in multiple cities, and the IDF announced that defensive systems are operating to intercept the threat.
Iran has launched missiles at the US Al Udeid airbase in Qatar on Monday in response to recent American airstrikes at the weekend. Qatar says it intercepted the attack with no casualties. Regional airspace was briefly shut down as authorities urged calm.
Explosions were heard across Doha on Monday as Iran launched what it called a devastating and powerful missile strike on the Al Udeid airbase, the largest US military facility in the region. The attack comes after US forces dropped heavy bunker buster bombs on Iranian nuclear sites at the weekend. Tehran vowed retaliation. The response came swiftly. According to Qatar's Ministry of Defense, multiple missiles were intercepted mid-air by Qatari air defenses. Qatar says there were no casualties.
The state of Qatar condemns in the strongest terms the Iranian missile attack on the Qatari Al Udeid airbase. This attack represents a flagrant violation of Qatar's sovereignty and contravenes the principles of good neighborliness and an assault on international legitimacy and international law. The state of Qatar affirms that it reserves the right to respond in accordance with international law and in proportion to the nature and scale of this attack.
Qatar closed its airspace shortly after the attack, diverting incoming flights. The UAE and Bahrain followed, shutting their skies amid regional tensions. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said it launched the operation Annunciation of Victory, claiming responsibility for strikes on US bases in Qatar and also in Iraq. Tehran said in a statement that Iran will not leave any attack on its territorial integrity, sovereignty, and national security unanswered under any circumstances. Iranians took to the streets of Tehran on Monday to celebrate Iran's attack on the Al Udeid U.S. airbase in Qatar. On social media, U.S. President Donald Trump wrote that Iran has officially responded to our obliteration of their nuclear facilities with a very weak response, which we expected, and have very effectively countered. He thanked the Emir of Qatar for his efforts toward peace and said that early notice from Iran allowed U.S. forces to avoid casualties.
Tensions in the Middle East continue to escalate, with Iran now accusing both the United States and Israel of launching attacks on its civilian nuclear sites. Following a ministerial summit in Istanbul, Iran's top diplomat has taken its case to Moscow and international watchdogs, calling for investigations and legal action.
Iran's top diplomat Araqchi arrived in the Russian capital on Monday after taking part in the ministerial conference of the Organization of Islamic Countries (OIC) in Istanbul, where he met his counterparts discussing with them the ongoing attacks by Israel on Iran and the U.S. involvement in the war. The Istanbul conference issued a declaration strongly condemning the Israel-U.S. attacks on Iran's civilian nuclear sites, which are monitored by the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. In Tehran, the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran has written a letter to the Director General of IAEA, Rafael Grossi, and asked for investigation into the U.S. attacks on Iran's nuclear sites. The letter also said Iran will take legal action via international bodies against inaction of the chief of the UN nuclear watchdog to condemn the attacks by Israel and the U.S., as well as his collaboration in their aggressions. Also, Iran's foreign ministry has sent a letter of protest to the Swiss embassy in Tehran, in which it has condemned Washington's attacks in support of Israel's military aggressions. The ministry said that the U.S. shall be held accountable for violating Iran's territory and for attacking its civilian nuclear facilities. The Swiss diplomatic mission in Tehran acts as the U.S. interest section after Washington cut diplomatic ties with Tehran following the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting for Anewz TV, Tehran.
The International Atomic Energy Agency has reported the likelihood of significant damage to Iran's Fordow uranium enrichment plant following U.S. airstrikes.
The Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, has said that the U.S. bombing of Iran's nuclear sites likely caused significant damage to the underground areas of the Fordow uranium enrichment plant. The United States joined the conflict between Iran and Israel and dropped the biggest conventional bombs in its arsenal on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities in efforts to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. The IAEA convened an emergency meeting in Vienna to address the aftermath of U.S. airstrikes.
At this time, no one, including the IAEA, is in a position to have fully assessed the underground damage at Fordow. Given the explosive payload utilized and the extreme vibration-sensitive nature of centrifuges, very significant damage is expected to have occurred.
Following the strike, Iran has informed the IAEA that here was no increase in off-site radiation levels at all 3 sites. Grossi called on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and urged them to return to negotiations to achieve the long-term assurance that Iran does not acquire a nuclear weapon. What remains uncertain is the status of Iran's stock of enriched uranium, particularly its more than 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to up to 60% purity, a short step from the roughly 90% that is weapons grade. According to IAEA calculations, further enrichment is enough to produce up to 9 nuclear weapons, though Iran says its intentions are peaceful and it does not seek atomic bombs.
Iran is one decision away from closing the Strait of Hormuz after its parliament approved the measure. That's one of key shipping routes carrying roughly 20% of global oil flows.
Iran's parliament has approved a measure to close the Strait of Hormuz, a vital oil shipping lane, in response to US airstrikes on its nuclear facilities. While the proposal reflects Tehran's growing defiance, any final decision rests with the Supreme National Security Council, which reports to Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway separating Iran from Oman and the United Arab Emirates, but its geopolitical significance far outweighs its size. Connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea and open ocean, it serves as the main maritime route for oil and gas exports from Gulf countries. Often called the world's most critical energy choke point, the strait handles roughly 20% of global oil consumption and a quarter of the world's liquefied natural gas trade. Major producers like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Qatar, and the UAE rely heavily on the passage to export crude and fuels. Data from analytics firm Vortexa confirms that between 18 and 21 million barrels have transited the strait daily between 2022 and May 2025. The stakes are high. Any disruption in the Strait of Hormuz could send oil prices soaring, destabilize global energy markets, and risk igniting direct conflict. That risk briefly flared this week. Following the US strikes, Brent crude surged over 3%, peaking at $81.40 a barrel, the highest since January. West Texas Intermediate also jumped, topping $78.40 before settling slightly lower. Market analysts say further price hikes are likely, driven by fears of Iranian retaliation, especially involving the strait. As the conflict deepens, attention has turned toward whether Iran will follow through on its threats. Historically, Tehran has threatened to shut the waterway during periods of tension, but has stopped short of doing so. However, this time, Iran's Press TV reports that parliament has reached a consensus. Still, the move awaits formal approval from the top Security Council and Supreme Leader Khamenei, leaving the threat real, but not yet realized. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has warned Iran against closing the strait, calling it a suicidal move that could rally international opposition against Tehran.
European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has warned that any Iranian move to close the Strait of Hormuz would be dangerous and destabilizing. Speaking ahead of a meeting with EU foreign ministers, Kallas said such a step would not be good for anybody. Her remarks come after Iran's State Press TV reported that the country's Supreme National Security Council is weighing whether to shut the key waterway. EU ministers are also expected to address broader developments across the region, including the conflict in Gaza and the state of relations with Israel.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry. Of course, we are discussing Middle East in broader sense, also after also Gaza and Article 2 of our association agreement with Israel. We have done the review. The review is ready. All the member states have it, and we will discuss further. What to read out of this and what will we do with this.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says recent U.S. strikes on Iran did not violate international law. Speaking ahead of the NATO summit in The Hague, Rutte reiterated that Iran must not obtain nuclear weapons and confirmed allies' unified stance on the issue.
NATO leaders are in The Hague, Netherlands this week for the NATO summit. It's shaping up to be a dynamic event, probably the most eventful one in decades. But the initial agenda, growing defense spending, more support for Ukraine, and countering Russia, is now sharing the spotlight with the recent U.S. airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites. Mark Rutte, the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands and now NATO's Secretary General, is walking a diplomatic tightrope to maintain cohesion. At a press briefing today, Rutte said U.S. strikes Sunday on Iran did not violate international law.
My biggest fear would be for Iran to own and be able to use and deploy a nuclear weapon. It would be a stranglehold on Israel, on the whole region and other parts of the world. And that is why NATO has said Iran should not, and this is a consistent position of NATO, Iran should not have its hands on a nuclear weapon. So, and I would not agree that this is against international law what the US did.
And now, officials in Iran say Iran started an operation against a U.S. base in Qatar. This, as video filmed by Qatar residents shows flashes and explosions. Iranian military officials and members of parliament did promise to make the U.S. pay for the strikes after U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to bomb 3 of Iran's nuclear sites. That was the first direct American military strike on Iran amid the region's widening and now escalating conflict. While the Iran situation is most certainly headline news, member countries are also gearing up for what was supposed to be the heart of the summit, a push by the U.S. to get NATO members to hike their defense spending budgets to 5% of GDP, which would essentially mean a dramatic jump from the long-standing 2% benchmark. All members are now on board after quite a bit of back and forth. However, Spain says it was able to opt out of the obligation. But today, Rutte said he questions just how low Spain can go. The next 2 days in The Hague should offer some more than routine communiques. And with the Iran attack on Qatar, it may impact whether Trump attends a summit after all. He was expected to arrive on Tuesday. We, of course, will have more to come here from the NATO summit this week. For Anewz, I'm Anita Sharma in The Hague. Back to Baku.
The European Union and Canada have agreed on a new security and defense partnership. The deal comes as both sides face rising geopolitical threats, from instability in the Middle East to growing economic tensions with the United States. The EU-Canada summit in Brussels also addressed urgent issues around Iran, Ukraine, and global trade.
On Monday, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, European Council President Antonio Costa and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney met in Brussels a day ahead of the NATO summit in The Hague. The summit, described by EU officials as not business as usual, marked the start of a new era in EU-Canada relations. At the heart of the talks, a first-of-its-kind EU security and defence pact with a country from the Americas. The deal paves the way for joint work in crisis management, cyber, maritime and space security, as well as arms control and support for Ukraine.
We have just signed the European Union-Canada Security Defence Partnership. It is a reflection of our mutual commitment to peace, transatlantic security and deeper cooperation in building defence capabilities. While NATO remains the cornerstone of our collective defence, this partnership will allow us to strengthen our preparedness faster and better, to invest more and to invest smarter.
The new pact will also give Canadian firms access to the EU's €150 billion safe military procurement programme, supporting joint investments across transatlantic industries.
We will now swiftly launch talks on Canada's access to a joint military procurement instrument. We call it SAFE. It's €150 billion. And together we will define where our cooperation can have the most value added and where we should channel joint investment.
Ukraine remained a key priority. Both sides pledged stronger industrial and economic cooperation to support Kyiv's war effort.
And of course it will be good for our continued support to Ukraine, because the more we invest in the highly innovative Ukrainian industry, the more the industry will be capable and the better Ukraine can defend itself.
The summit also tackled the escalating tensions with Iran were high on the agenda after fresh missile attacks on US targets in the Gulf.
Iran has pursued nuclear weapons. These are violations of international law. These are the ones we look to.
We must commit to ensuring respect for nuclear non-proliferation treaties. Thus, Iran must never have a nuclear weapon. We must work towards peace. Peace obviously means we must avoid escalation.
As global tensions mount, Brussels and Ottawa are signalling a deeper alliance, one focused not just on trade and diplomacy, but on joint defence and strategic readiness. The new partnership, leaders said, is just the first step in building a stronger transatlantic front.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky have announced a military co-production agreement during a visit to London. The announcement comes amid the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war and follows a recent deadly attack on Kiev.
In a show of deepening defence ties, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced a landmark military co-production agreement after they met in London on Monday. The deal, the first of its kind between the two nations, was disclosed at Downing Street, where the leaders also addressed Ukrainian troops receiving training under Operation Interflex.
I'm really proud that this afternoon we're able to announce an industrial military co-production agreement, the first of its kind so far as Ukraine and the UK are concerned, which will be a massive step forward now in the contribution that we can continue to make, and is really a symbol of not only our joint work in this conflict, but the 100-year agreement that we've put in place.
Zelensky expressed gratitude for Britain's continued support and emphasised the value of shared military experience.
It's a very historic moment. It was, and the good result of today's our meeting is this additional decision of co-production. And I think it will be very strong and will strengthen both nations. It's very important, yes, to share our experience, your experience, by the way, first of all, your experience on the battlefield and your knowledge and experience during Interflex training missions.
At this point, not many details about the specifics of the agreement have been released so far. The London visit also included meetings with King Charles III and parliamentary leaders and comes just a day after a deadly overnight assault on Kiev, one of the most intense attacks in recent months that left at least 9 people dead and at least 33 others injured, involving a barrage of more than 350 missiles and drones. While Ukraine's air defences intercepted the majority, the attack caused significant destruction, including the partial collapse of a residential building.
Afghanistan has condemned the recent U.S. airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites, warning that such actions threaten regional stability. Our Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
Afghanistan has strongly condemned recent U.S. attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities, calling the strikes a serious violation of Iran's sovereignty. The statement comes amid growing fears of wider conflict in the Middle East. In a statement, Afghanistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs described the U.S. strikes as unacceptable, urging all parties involved to step back from confrontation and commit to diplomatic solutions. The ministry warned that such military action only increased the risk of escalation and further instability across the region. The statement emphasized the importance of respecting national sovereignty and territorial integrity, stressing that the ongoing conflict must be resolved through peaceful negotiations and dialogue, not military aggression. Afghanistan also expressed concern over the potential humanitarian and security consequences of continued attacks, stating that regional stability must be preserved through cooperation and restraint. Following the Israeli strikes on Iran, Afghanistan is also experiencing a dramatic increase in air traffic. According to local news and data from Flight Radar 24, the number of daily flights over Afghan airspace has surged more than 5-fold, reaching around 280 per day. Airlines have rerouted flights to avoid Iranian skies due to security concerns, making Afghanistan a preferred corridor despite ongoing risks. As regional tensions rise, Afghanistan is calling for calm and diplomacy. Tamim Bahis reporting for Anewz from Kabul, Afghanistan.
Tensions are escalating sharply after U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. As missile attacks continue in the region, people are evacuating through the Astara state border crossing between Iran and Azerbaijan in increasing numbers. Our correspondent Zainab Farizadeh has more.
Behind me is the Astara border, and today more and more people are crossing over from Iran into Azerbaijan, unsure of what comes next. We are just meters away from Iranian territory, and the tension is rising. After United States strikes on Iran's nuclear sites, Tehran's military now says it considers American targets fair game, not just Israeli ones. A senior commander warns that the U.S. should expect heavy consequences, while Iran's new military chief, Major General Amir Hatami, promised a decisive response. Iran's supreme leader has also weighed in, calling Israel's bombing campaign a big crime and a big mistake. The statement came just hours after a missile was launched at Israel. Here in Astara, we have seen a steady stream of Iranians, some with families, some alone, quietly crossing the border. They won't speak on camera, but their urgency says enough. Meanwhile, President Trump will meet with his national security team on Monday to discuss next steps.
Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze says his government remains committed to joining the European Union by 2030. Responding to criticism from European officials, he said recent statements reflect a deep value crisis within the EU bureaucracy. Kobakhidze expressed hope that Europe will overcome its current economic, democratic and institutional challenges. On the topic of Georgia's visa-free regime, he called for an end to what he described as political blackmail and stressed that Georgia continues to maintain open communication with its European partners. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinan met with Georgia Minister of Internal Affairs Gela Geladze during his official visit to Yerevan. According to officials, discussions focused on migration issues, joint crime-fighting measures, and plans to sign new cooperation agreements. The two sides also reviewed shared regional challenges and stressed the need for coordinated efforts to maintain peace and stability. Uzbekistan has become the leading country in Central Asia in terms of foreign investment in 2024. That's according to a new report from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. At the most recent Tashkent Investment Forum alone, agreements worth more than $30 billion were signed. Fariza Kalimurzana has more.
Uzbekistan ranked first among Central Asian countries in the volume of foreign capital inflows at the end of last year. According to the report from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, a total of $2.8 billion was invested in the country's economy. Turkmenistan came in second with $1.6 billion, followed by Kyrgyzstan with $705 million. Uzbekistan continues to show steady growth. In 2024 alone, investments in digital sector amounted to $900 million. This was made possible thanks to reforms in telecommunications and rising demand for digital services. Over $1 billion was also directed toward major transportation projects, including highways, logistics, and railway infrastructure. Between 2020 and 2024, the country carried out more than 40 energy sector projects, attracting a total investment of $18 billion, the highest figure in the region. Interestingly, Uzbekistan's rise happens against the backdrop of a global slowdown. According to the same UN report, global foreign investment dropped by 11% last year, falling to $1.5 trillion. It marks the second consecutive year of decline in international capital flows. Uzbekistan's economic transformation continues under the National Uzbekistan 2030 strategy. The plan aims to grow the country's gross domestic product to $160 billion and raise the average income per person to $4,000 a year. To achieve these targets, the country is placing strong emphasis on attracting foreign capital and expanding its export potential. Just a few years ago, such progress would have seemed unlikely. Until 2017, Uzbekistan maintained tight currency controls with an artificial exchange rate and a parallel black market. Conducting foreign currency transactions for businesses was difficult. That changed with sweeping reforms, and the currency market was liberalized. Legislation was introduced to protect investors, and dedicated government agencies were established to attract international capital. Economists say Uzbekistan's economy is becoming more diverse, unlike some of its neighbors that still depend mostly on raw materials exports. Uzbekistan is developing different industries which could help the country better handle future global economic challenges. Fariza Kalimurzina, Anewz, in Almaty, Kazakhstan.
Turkey and the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, better known as UNRWA, have signed an agreement to open its office in Istanbul. The signing took place on the sidelines of the 51st Organization of Islamic Cooperation Council of Foreign Ministers meeting.
And a joint order in
the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees is set to open an office in Istanbul. According to UNRWA, the agreement represents a milestone in its relationship with Turkey and demonstrates the country's continued political and financial backing for the agency. Filipe Lazzarini, the Commissioner General of UNRWA, described the decision as strategic. He said that the new office will help the agency expand and diversify its political and financial support base. Lazzarini also praised the Turkish government for increasing its humanitarian assistance during the war, providing both financial aid for life-saving operations and wheat flour for the people of Gaza. Since joining the UNRWA Advisory Commission in 1949, Turkey has been a long-standing supporter of the agency's mission to assist Palestinian refugees. For decades, UNRWA has delivered vital services, including primary health care, education and emergency aid to Palestinian refugees living in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, Lebanon, Syria and Jordan. We are done for now, but don't go far. Stay tuned for more and have a wonderful morning.